The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, somewhere over the Zagros Mountains. Raven 17, this is Groundhog Actual. We're taking heavy fire. Where's our air support? The voice carried that particular brand of controlled desperation that comes when elite operators find themselves genuinely surprised by the enemy's capabilities. Flight Lieutenant Indira Ghost Vasquez adjusted her oxygen mask and checked her instruments for the third time in 2 minutes. Her F-15E Strike Eagle cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 37,000 feet, riding thermals that hadn't existed on any weather briefing. Below her, a monsoon system churned across the Iranian border, spawning lightning that illuminated the mountain peaks in strobing, ethereal flashes. Groundhog Actual Raven 17, she transmitted back, her voice steady despite the turbulence rattling her aircraft. I'm tracking your position. Be advised weather conditions are challenging. Challenging was military understatement at its finest. The storm system stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Caspian Sea, a wall of convective energy that meteorologists had classified as unsurvivable for aircraft operations. Every pilot in the 494th Fighter Squadron had been grounded, every pilot except Ghost. The SEAL team leader's response came through layers of static. Raven 17, we've got 12 operators pinned down in a compound, multiple enemy positions. Our exfil window closes in 23 minutes and we've got wounded. A pause, filled with the distant sound of automatic weapons fire. They told us air cover wouldn't happen tonight. Ghost's gloved fingers tightened on the stick. 3 years of flying combat missions had taught her that wouldn't happen was often code for too dangerous for anyone to attempt. She'd heard those words before, in Afghanistan, when a sandstorm grounded the entire wing except her. In Syria, when surface-to-air missile threats kept everyone else at high altitude. Tonight, it was the storm that served as the military's polite way of writing off 12 of America's finest. She banked left, angling toward the coordinates burned into her display. The F-15's twin Pratt and Whitney engines responded with a throaty roar that she felt in her chest, a sound that had become more familiar than her own heartbeat. Below her, the storm system pulsed with malevolent energy, its cloud tops reaching nearly to her altitude. Lightning discharged in sheets across the cumulus towers, creating an ethereal light show that would have been beautiful if it weren't potentially lethal. Groundhog Actual, Raven 17 is inbound, she transmitted, her voice carrying across the darkness to 12 men who had stopped believing in miracles. Storm or no storm, nobody gets left behind. In the pre-dawn darkness over hostile territory, with meteorological forces that could tear her aircraft apart, Flight Lieutenant Indira Vasquez pushed her F-15 into a shallow dive, chasing coordinates and promises in equal measure. The mission they said couldn't happen was about to begin. The F-15E Strike Eagle designated Raven 17 had rolled off the Boeing production line in St. Louis on a Tuesday morning in March 2019. Serial number 910335, she carried the scars of 3 combat deployments. A small shrapnel gouge above the port intake from Kandahar, stress fractures around the weapon's pylons from repeated heavy loadouts, and a faded kill marking on the fuselage that few people ever noticed. Tonight, she carried a full complement of precision-guided munitions and enough fuel for 4 hours of combat operations. Her pilot had different scars. Flight Lieutenant Indira Vasquez had earned her call sign Ghost, not for any supernatural ability to appear and disappear, though ground forces often swore she materialized from thin air when they needed her most. The name came from her uncanny ability to fly missions that officially never happened, in conditions that officially couldn't be flown, to places that officially didn't exist on any map. If you asked the Pentagon about Ghost's mission record, you'd receive a polite redirect to classified operations protocols. The storm ahead of her measured 200 nautical miles across and reached nearly to the stratosphere. Inside its churning mass, winds exceeded 120 knots, with updrafts and downdrafts that could snap an aircraft's wings like kindling. Embedded thunderstorms generated electromagnetic pulses strong enough to fry unshielded electronics, while ice crystals formed at altitudes where they shouldn't exist, creating a cocktail of atmospheric violence that had grounded commercial aviation across 3 countries. Ghost had been studying weather patterns since she was 12 years old, growing up on her grandmother's ranch outside Tucson, where monsoons arrived with the predictability of scripture and the violence of war. She could read cloud formations like other pilots read approach plates, interpreting the subtle signatures that indicated where the storm was weakest, where gaps might exist, where a skilled pilot with enough nerve might thread the needle between physics and fate. Her radar painted the storm in shades of red and magenta, with yellow cores indicating the most severe precipitation. She selected a narrow corridor between 2 supercells, a path that appeared for roughly 8 minutes before the storm's rotation would close it again. 8 minutes to descend 25,000 feet, penetrate hostile airspace, locate 12 operators in a compound roughly the size of a football field, and deliver precision strikes against enemy positions without hitting friendly forces. Raven 17, Groundhog Actual. Be advised, we've identified at least 3 heavy machine gun positions and possible RPG teams. Enemy strength estimated at company level. The SEAL team leader's voice carried the careful professionalism that comes from years of calling in airstrikes. Can you confirm your loadout? Ghost glanced at her weapons display. Groundhog Actual, I'm carrying 4 GBU-38s, 2 AGM-65 Mavericks, and 500 rounds of 20mm. She paused, watching lightning illuminate the storm's interior structure, also carrying 1 very stubborn pilot. The first tendrils of the storm reached up to caress her aircraft at 32,000 feet. Ghost felt the initial turbulence through her seat, a gentle shaking that would build into bone-rattling violence as she descended deeper into the system. She adjusted her shoulder harnesses and double-checked that her helmet was properly secured. In severe turbulence, an unsecured object weighing less than 2 pounds could become a projectile capable of knocking a pilot unconscious. Her hands moved across the instrument panel with practiced efficiency, adjusting radar settings to penetrate precipitation, switching her navigation display to terrain-following mode, and pre-selecting weapon systems she hoped she wouldn't need to use. The F-15E was designed for exactly this type of mission: deep strike in hostile territory, operating alone, adapting to conditions that would challenge any pilot's skill and nerve. Raven 17, this is Darkstar Control. The voice belonged to Colonel Sarah Martinez, Operations Commander for the 494th Fighter Squadron. Be advised, we're showing severe weather across your entire route. Recommend you hold at current altitude until conditions improve. Ghost keyed her microphone. Darkstar Control, Groundhog Actual has wounded and a closing exfil window. I'm proceeding as briefed. A pause. Ghost, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. The words hung in the electronic ether between them, loaded with 3 years of history that had never quite been spoken aloud. Colonel Martinez had been her first squadron commander, the woman who'd given her a chance when other commanders saw only liability in a pilot who insisted on taking impossible missions. Martinez had also been the one to sign off on Ghost's disciplinary actions: 2 Article 15s for unauthorized low-altitude flights, 1 formal reprimand for excessive risk-taking during training operations, and a notation in her personnel file that she was professionally competent but prone to independent decision-making. "Ma'am, this isn't about proving anything," Ghost replied, her voice steady as she began her descent into the storm. "It's about 12 guys who need to come home." The first real turbulence hit her at 28,000 feet, a violent updraft that slammed her against her restraints and caused her altitude to jump 300 feet in 2 seconds. She corrected with stick and rudder inputs that had become instinctive, feeling the aircraft's response through her fingertips and the soles of her feet. The F-15 was a stable platform, but stability was relative when flying through atmospheric conditions that resembled riding inside a washing machine. Lightning flashed outside her canopy, close enough that she could smell ozone despite her sealed cockpit. The electromagnetic pulse caused brief interference on her radios, filling her headset with static that sounded like the universe clearing its throat. She switched to her backup navigation system and continued her descent. Groundhog Actual, Raven 17. I'm entering the weather. Expect communication difficulties for the next several minutes. Copy Raven 17. We'll keep a light on for you. At 24,000 feet, the storm embraced her completely. Visibility dropped to zero as she entered a solid wall of precipitation that turned her windscreen opaque and reduced the world to instrument readings and radio chatter. The turbulence intensified, throwing her aircraft through changes in altitude and heading that would have terrified a commercial pilot and challenged even the most experienced military aviators. Ghost rode the violence with a combination of skill and intuition that had taken 15 years to develop. She'd learned to fly in weather like this, cutting her teeth on training missions that other student pilots considered suicidal. Her instructors at Euronato Joint Jet Pilot Training had called her either gifted or insane, depending on their tolerance for students who treated meteorological phenomena as merely another navigation challenge. The truth was somewhere between both assessments. Ghost possessed an almost supernatural ability to read atmospheric conditions, to sense the shape and movement of weather systems in ways that couldn't be taught in any classroom or flight manual. She felt the storm's rhythm through her aircraft, understanding its patterns and predicting its behavior with an accuracy that bordered on prescient. What looked like reckless flying to other pilots was actually a carefully calculated dance, with forces that most aviators preferred to avoid entirely. Her radar showed the narrow corridor between supercells still existed, though it was closing faster than her weather briefing had predicted. She had perhaps 6 minutes to thread the gap, descend another 15,000 feet, and break through to visual conditions below the cloud deck. 6 minutes to transition from instrument flying in severe turbulence to precision attack in hostile territory. Raven 17 Groundhog Actual. The transmission was broken, filled with static and interference from the electromagnetic environment surrounding her aircraft. Enemy, increasing. Need immediate. 2 minutes. She keyed her microphone, hoping her transmission would penetrate the electrical chaos surrounding her position. Groundhog Actual, Raven 17. Say again, your transmission is garbled. No response. The storm had effectively isolated her from ground forces, leaving her to navigate by instruments and instinct through atmospheric conditions that existed at the very edge of what her aircraft could survive. She was alone in a way that few people ever experience, separated from earth and sky by aluminum and composite materials, trusting her life to physics and engineering, while flying through a maelstrom that could disintegrate her aircraft in milliseconds. But Ghost had been alone before. She'd learned early that solitude was often the price of doing what needed to be done, of taking missions that others considered impossible or inadvisable. Tonight's storm was just another form of solitude, another test of her ability to function independently when circumstances placed her beyond the reach of normal communication and support. She continued her descent, chasing coordinates and promises through the heart of the storm. The break came at 17,000 feet, so suddenly that she almost missed it. One moment she was flying blind through solid precipitation, fighting turbulence that threatened to tear her wings off. The next, she burst through the cloud deck into relatively clear air beneath the storm. The transition was like emerging from underwater, disorienting and beautiful in equal measure. Below her, the landscape of eastern Iran stretched away in the pale gray light of early morning. The Zagros Mountains rose like the Earth's backbone, their peaks shrouded in cloud and mystery. Somewhere in those mountains, 12 American operators were fighting for their lives against odds that military planners had deemed unacceptable for air support. Ghost leveled her aircraft at 15,000 feet and checked her navigation display. The coordinates provided by Groundhog Actual placed the target compound in a valley roughly 8 nautical miles ahead, nestled between peaks that rose nearly to her current altitude. Her fuel state remained adequate for the mission, though the storm penetration had consumed more than planned. She would have approximately 20 minutes over target before reaching bingo fuel, the point at which she'd need to depart for her recovery base. Groundhog Actual, Raven 17. Her transmission was clear now, no longer filtered through electrical interference. I'm below the weather and proceeding to your position. Request immediate target description and friendly locations. The response came through clearly, heavy with relief and professional urgency. Raven 17, Groundhog Actual. We're in a compound approximately 200 meters square, stone walls, single-story buildings. Enemy positions are north, east, and south of our location. We're taking fire from at least 3 heavy machine guns and multiple small arms. Ghost switched her radar to ground mapping mode and began her initial approach to the target area. The compound appeared on her display as a cluster of structures surrounded by defensive positions that were currently invisible to her sensors, but very real to the men taking cover behind whatever protection they could find. She would need to make her identification visually, distinguishing between friendly and enemy forces while traveling at several hundred miles per hour in an aircraft that wasn't designed for low-altitude reconnaissance. Groundhog Actual, I need you to mark your position with infrared strobe. I'll make one pass for reconnaissance, then establish an attack pattern. She paused, considering the tactical situation. Be advised, danger-close procedures will be in effect. I need accurate distances to friendly positions. Roger, Raven 17. Infrared strobe is active. Friendlies are in the southeast corner of the compound. Nearest enemy position is approximately 100 meters north of our location. 100 meters. In aviation terms, that was effectively the same position. At the speed she would be traveling during her attack runs, the difference between friendly and enemy forces would be measured in fractions of a second and degrees of bearing. One mistake, one slight miscalculation, and she would be delivering precision-guided death onto the very people she was trying to save. Ghost reduced power and began her descent toward the target area, configuring her aircraft for low-altitude operations. She switched her weapon system to air-to-ground mode and selected her first weapon, a GBU-38 Joint Direct Attack munition with a blast radius that could level a city block when used properly, or eliminate friendly forces just as effectively when used improperly. The compound became visible at 5 nautical miles, a collection of flat-roofed buildings surrounded by defensive walls that had probably provided adequate protection against conventional ground assault. Against precision-guided munitions delivered from an F-15 Strike Eagle, the walls would offer about as much protection as tissue paper. Ghost could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions around the compound's perimeter, small sparks of light that indicated where enemy forces had established their firing positions. Her targeting system began analyzing the tactical situation, calculating approach angles and weapon employment solutions based on the coordinates she'd been provided. The computer was efficient and accurate, but it couldn't distinguish between 12 American operators and 40 enemy fighters. That distinction would require human judgment, applied at speed and under pressure that allowed no margin for error. Groundhog Actual, I have visual on your position. I'm seeing significant enemy activity north and east of the compound. Confirm your current status and any changes to friendly locations. Raven 17, we've taken 2 casualties. We're still in the southeast corner, but we may need to move if the enemy tries to flank us from the west. 2 casualties. Ghost felt something cold settle in her stomach, a familiar sensation that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the mathematics of combat. 12 operators had become 10 effectives, which meant their defensive capabilities were compromised, and their exfiltration timeline was accelerated. Every minute she spent identifying targets was a minute that increased the probability that more Americans would be wounded or killed. She rolled inverted and pulled her aircraft into a steep diving turn, bleeding altitude and airspeed as she maneuvered for her first attack run. The compound rushed toward her canopy, growing from a cluster of dots to a detailed tactical picture that included individual windows, doorways, and fighting positions. She could see enemy fighters moving between buildings, their movements coordinated and disciplined in ways that suggested professional military training rather than irregular militia. The infrared strobe marking friendly positions appeared as a brilliant star in her targeting display, pulsing with electronic precision in the southeast corner of the compound. 100 meters to the north, she identified her first target, a heavy machine gun position that had been constructed with military precision and was currently pouring automatic weapons fire into the building where American forces had taken shelter. Ghost aligned her aircraft with the target and prepared to deliver America's version of precision diplomacy. The first GBU-38 released from her aircraft at 4:32 hours, local time. The 500-pound warhead separated cleanly from its pylon and began its guided descent toward coordinates that had been programmed with GPS precision. Ghost pulled hard right and climbed away from the target area, feeling G-forces press her into her ejection seat as she maneuvered to avoid both the blast effects of her own weapon and potential return fire from surface-to-air missile systems. The explosion illuminated the pre-dawn landscape like a miniature sun, casting sharp shadows across the mountain valley and sending a column of smoke and debris several hundred feet into the air. When the flash subsided, the enemy machine gun position had ceased to exist. In its place was a crater roughly 20 feet in diameter, surrounded by scattered rubble that had once been defensive positions and human beings. Raven 17 Groundhog Actual, good hit on the north position. We're still taking fire from the east and south. Can you service those targets? Ghost was already maneuvering for her second attack run, her aircraft configured for precision strikes against enemy positions that were located uncomfortably close to friendly forces. The eastern position appeared to be a mortar team that had established their firing point behind a stone wall approximately 150 meters from American forces. The southern position was another heavy machine gun, this one positioned to cover the compound's main entrance and prevent any attempted breakout by the trapped SEAL team. She selected her second GBU-38 and began her approach to the eastern target. The mortar position would be more challenging than her first strike, requiring her to attack from a specific angle that would direct blast effects away from friendly forces while ensuring complete destruction of the enemy position. The margin for error was measured in single-digit meters, and any miscalculation would result in what military planners euphemistically called fratricide incidents. Groundhog Actual, I'm inbound on the eastern position. Confirm all friendly personnel are taking maximum cover. Roger, Raven 17. All personnel are in hard cover and prepared for danger close strikes. The second weapon released at precisely 4:34 hours, its guidance system tracking toward coordinates that represented the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Ghost maintained her attack heading longer than tactically advisable, visually confirming that her weapon was tracking correctly before executing her escape maneuver. The explosion was smaller than her first strike, constrained by the need to limit collateral damage, but equally effective in neutralizing the enemy position. 2 down, 1 to go. The southern machine gun position continued to fire into the compound, its crew either unaware of their tactical situation or too committed to their mission to withdraw in the face of obvious air superiority. Ghost respected their dedication while preparing to end their war permanently. Raven 17, Groundhog Actual. Outstanding work on both targets. The southern position is still active, but they're repositioning. It looks like they're trying to get a better angle on our location. Ghost circled the compound at 3,000 feet, using her targeting pod to search for the repositioning enemy forces. The Southern machine gun crew had demonstrated tactical intelligence by moving their position after witnessing the destruction of their comrades, but movement also created opportunities for visual identification and precision engagement. She could see individual figures moving between buildings south of the compound, carrying equipment that her sensors identified as crew-served weapons. The tactical situation was evolving in ways that favored her capabilities. Enemy forces on the move were easier to distinguish from friendly personnel and presented targets that were separated from American positions by greater distances. She could employ her remaining precision-guided munitions with reduced risk of fratricide, while the enemy's movement indicated they were reacting to her presence rather than executing a coordinated assault plan. Groundhog Actual. I have visual on approximately 6 enemy personnel moving south from the compound. They appear to be establishing a new firing position at approximately 300 meters from your location. Ghost adjusted her sensor settings to enhance target resolution. Request permission to engage with 20mm cannon. Raven 17. You are cleared to engage all enemy forces outside the compound with any available weapons. The M61, a 1 Vulcan cannon mounted in her aircraft's nose, carried 500 rounds of 20mm ammunition, each projectile capable of defeating light armor and devastating human targets. Unlike her precision-guided munitions, the cannon required her to maneuver into close proximity with enemy forces and deliver fire through visual acquisition and manual aiming. It was old-school air-to-ground combat, requiring skills that predated GPS guidance and computer-calculated impact points. Ghost rolled inverted and pulled her aircraft into a steep diving attack, aligning her flight path with the enemy formation while calculating lead angles and burst lengths. The enemy fighters were moving across broken terrain, using natural cover and camouflage discipline that suggested professional training. They would present challenging targets that required precise flying and accurate shooting. Her cannon began firing at 800 meters range, sending streams of high-explosive projectiles downrange at 6,100 rounds per minute. The tracers created brilliant lines of light between her aircraft and the target area, each burst adjusted based on observed impact points and target movement. The sound was devastating, a deep, resonant buzzing that could be heard for miles, and had inspired terror in enemy forces across multiple conflicts. The effect on target was immediate and conclusive. Enemy personnel who had been moving with tactical discipline suddenly found themselves under attack from a weapon system that could deliver 30 pounds of high-explosive ammunition per second with surgical precision. The survivors, if any, immediately sought cover in terrain features that couldn't protect them from aerial observation and follow-up attacks. Raven 17, Groundhog Actual. I count multiple enemy KIA south of our position. Immediate area appears clear of hostile activity. Ghost pulled out of her attack dive and established a high orbit over the compound, scanning for additional threats while monitoring her fuel state. She had approximately 8 minutes of on-station time remaining before reaching bingo fuel, enough for one more attack run if additional targets presented themselves. The tactical situation had shifted decisively in favor of American forces, but Ghost understood that tactical success was temporary without immediate exploitation. The enemy forces surrounding the compound had been eliminated or suppressed, creating a window of opportunity for the SEAL team to execute their extraction plan. That window would remain open only as long as she maintained air superiority over the target area, and her fuel state was becoming a limiting factor in her ability to provide continued support. Groundhog Actual, Raven 17. I'm showing bingo fuel in approximately 8 minutes. What's your status for immediate extraction? Raven 17, we've got 2-liter cases and need approximately 5 minutes to reach our primary exfil point. Can you provide cover during movement? Ghost checked her fuel gauges and calculated time-distance factors for her return flight. She could remain on station for perhaps 10 minutes beyond bingo fuel, using her reserve fuel to ensure the SEAL team reached their extraction point safely. It was a calculated risk that violated standard fuel management procedures, but aligned perfectly with her personal philosophy regarding mission priorities. Groundhog Actual, I can give you 15 minutes of continued air cover. After that, you're on your own until your exfil birds arrive. Roger, Raven 17, we're moving now. Ghost adjusted her orbit to provide maximum visual coverage of the extraction route, while maintaining sufficient altitude to detect any enemy reinforcements that might be approaching the area. Her sensors showed no immediate threats, but the tactical situation in hostile territory could change within seconds. Enemy forces that had withdrawn after her initial attacks might be regrouping for a coordinated counterattack, or additional units might be responding to the sounds of combat from other locations. Through her targeting pod, she could observe the SEAL team's movement from the compound toward their extraction point. 12 figures moved with the careful choreography of elite operators conducting a tactical withdrawal under fire, 2 wounded personnel being carried by their teammates, security elements providing overwatch. The entire formation moving with purpose and discipline despite the casualties they had sustained. Ghost had seen similar movements during her previous combat deployments, and she understood the physical and emotional cost associated with carrying wounded teammates across hostile terrain. Every step represented a commitment that went beyond military orders or tactical necessity. These men were demonstrating the warrior ethos that bound military units together, the absolute refusal to abandon comrades regardless of personal risk or mission complications. She maintained her protective orbit above them, ready to deliver immediate fire support against any enemy forces that might threaten their movement. Her remaining weapons included 2 AGM-65 Maverick missiles and approximately 200 rounds of 20mm ammunition, enough firepower to engage multiple targets if the tactical situation required additional intervention. The sky above the Zagros Mountains was beginning to lighten with the approaching dawn, painting the mountain peaks in subtle shades of gold and rose that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. At precisely 4:47 hours, Ghost's low fuel warning illuminated on her instrument panel. She had reached the point where continued operations would require using fuel reserves that might be needed for her return flight to base. Military aviation operated on strict fuel management principles that balanced mission requirements against crew survival, and those principles had been written with the blood of pilots who had attempted to stretch their fuel beyond safe limits. Groundhog Actual, Raven 17, I'm at bingo fuel and need to depart for recovery base. What's your current status? Raven 17, we're approximately 2 minutes from our exfil point. No enemy contact since your last gun run. Ghost made a decision that violated her training, her standing orders, and probably several regulations that would be explained to her in detail when she returned to base. She reduced her throttles to minimum power settings and continued her orbit above the extraction site, stretching her fuel endurance to provide maximum protection for the ground forces below. Groundhog Actual, I'm staying until your ride arrives. Raven 17, negative. We don't need you to flame out trying to cover us. You've done enough. The words carried more weight than simple tactical communication. Ghost heard acknowledgement in the SEAL team leader's voice, recognition of what she had accomplished during the past 20 minutes. She had penetrated weather that grounded every other aircraft in the region, delivered precision strikes in conditions that tested the limits of her aircraft's capabilities, and provided air support that had transformed a desperate defensive action into a successful extraction operation. But more than tactical success, she had demonstrated something that couldn't be measured in bomb damage assessments or enemy casualties. She had proven that impossible was often simply another word for untested, that the margins between achievable and unachievable were frequently defined by individual courage rather than collective limitations. Groundhog Actual, affirm, I'll depart when your exfil birds are on station. The sound of rotary wing aircraft became audible at 4:51 hours, the distinctive wop-wop-wop of heavy helicopters approaching from the southeast. Two MH-47 Chinooks appeared on Ghost's radar, flying nap of the earth through the mountain valleys to reach the extraction site. The cavalry was arriving, precisely on schedule, and with the overwhelming firepower necessary to ensure that American personnel would be extracted safely from hostile territory. Ghost watched the helicopters establish their landing pattern while conducting one final visual sweep of the surrounding terrain. No enemy activity, no threats to the extraction, no indication that her departure would compromise the safety of ground forces. The mission was complete. Groundhog Actual, Raven 17. Your rides are here and I'm departing for home. It's been an honor flying for you. Raven 17, Groundhog Actual. The honor has been entirely ours. Ghost turned her F-15E northeast toward her recovery base, climbing through the storm system that had nearly prevented her mission from occurring. The weather conditions that had seemed so threatening during her inbound flight now felt almost routine, just another navigation challenge to be solved with skill and patience. She had approximately 40 minutes of fuel remaining, enough for a straightened approach with minimal reserves for emergency procedures. The flight back to base provided time for reflection on what she had accomplished during the past hour. From a tactical perspective, she had successfully employed precision-guided munitions against multiple enemy positions in weather conditions that most pilots would have considered unsurvivable. From a strategic perspective, she had demonstrated air power's capability to influence ground operations even when environmental factors seemed to preclude aviation support. But the mission's significance extended beyond tactical or strategic considerations. Ghost understood that she had participated in something that would be remembered long after the official reports were filed and the medals were awarded. She had proven that individual determination could overcome institutional limitations, that one pilot with sufficient skill and commitment could accomplish missions that military planners had deemed impossible. Her radio crackled with transmissions from various agencies tracking her return flight. Air traffic control wanted her position and estimated arrival time. Operations wanted her initial mission report. Maintenance wanted her post-flight aircraft status. The administrative machinery of military aviation was already beginning to process her mission into official documentation and lessons learned. Raven 17, Darkstar Control. Report your status and fuel state. Darkstar Control, Raven 17. Mission complete, all objectives achieved. Fuel state is adequate for recovery with minimal reserves. She paused, considering how to summarize the past hour in military terminology. Weather conditions were as briefed. Aircraft performance was nominal. Ground forces are secure. Roger, Raven 17. Outstanding work. We'll have a full debrief waiting when you land. Ghost smiled inside her oxygen mask. Military debriefs were designed to capture tactical details and identify lessons that could be applied to future operations. But some aspects of tonight's mission couldn't be captured in official documentation. The moment when she had committed to penetrating the storm despite weather warnings. The calculations she had performed while maneuvering for danger-close precision strikes. The decision to remain on station, beyond bingo fuel to ensure ground forces reached safety. Those elements of the mission lived in the indefinable space between training and instinct, between regulation and innovation. They represented the human factors that distinguished exceptional military performance from merely competent execution of standard procedures. Ahead of her, the lights of her home base became visible through the clearing weather. She was returning from a mission that officially couldn't be flown, carrying memories of achievements that couldn't be adequately described in any after-action report. Flight Lieutenant Indira Ghost Vasquez touched down at Incirlik Air Base at 5:37 hours, her F-15E Strike Eagle settling onto the runway with the controlled precision of a combat aircraft returning from successful operations. Ground crews were waiting to conduct post-flight inspections and download mission data from her aircraft's systems, beginning the process that would transform her night's work into official documentation. As she taxied toward the aircraft parking area, Ghost could see personnel gathering near the operations building. Word of her mission had clearly spread through the normal channels that carried news of exceptional achievements in military communities. She had accomplished something that would be discussed in squadron-ready rooms and flight training classrooms, becoming part of the informal oral tradition that preserved lessons learned from combat operations. Colonel Martinez was waiting near her parking spot when Ghost shut down her engines and began her post-flight procedures. The expression on her commander's face suggested a complex mixture of relief, pride, and the administrative concerns that came with subordinates who routinely exceeded authorized risk levels while achieving mission success. Ghost, how's the aircraft? Ma'am, she's fine. No significant maintenance issues, fuel system performed nominally, weapons employment was successful across all platforms. Ghost completed her shutdown checklist while speaking, her hands moving across switches and circuit breakers with automatic precision. I'll need to file a detailed mission report, but the bottom line is 12 Americans are coming home tonight. Colonel Martinez nodded, her expression indicating that she understood both the tactical significance of the mission and its potential administrative complications. Pilots who flew missions in weather conditions that grounded everyone else tended to generate paperwork that reached levels far above squadron operations. Success was often as bureaucratically challenging as failure, particularly when that success was achieved through methods that violated standard procedures. Ghost, you need to understand that there are going to be questions about tonight's mission. Flying through that storm system was. She paused, searching for words that balanced professional evaluation with personal admiration. It was either incredibly brave or incredibly reckless, and the difference between those two judgments often depends on outcomes that aren't always under pilot control. Ghost removed her helmet and looked directly at her squadron commander. Ma'am, 12 SEAL team members were pinned down by enemy fire with wounded personnel and a closing exfil window. They needed immediate air support, and I was the only asset available to provide that support. She paused, considering her words carefully. I evaluated the risks and determined that the mission was achievable within acceptable parameters. Acceptable to whom? Every meteorologist on base said that storm system was unsurvivable for aircraft operations. Acceptable to me, ma'am, and acceptable to 12 operators who needed someone to take that risk on their behalf. The debrief lasted 3 hours and involved personnel from multiple agencies interested in various aspects of Ghost's mission. Intelligence officers wanted details about enemy positions and capabilities. Operations personnel wanted weather information and aircraft performance data. Safety officers wanted to understand her decision-making process and risk evaluation procedures. Ghost answered their questions with professional precision, providing tactical details while avoiding speculation about alternative approaches or potential outcomes. She had accomplished her mission within the parameters she had established for herself, using skills and judgment developed through years of training and combat experience. The fact that her parameters differed from those established by higher headquarters was a command decision rather than a tactical error. But the most significant conversation occurred after the formal debrief, when Colonel Martinez requested a private meeting in her office. Ghost sat across from her commander, while both women considered the professional and personal implications of the night's events. Ghost, I need you to understand something about tonight's mission. What you accomplished was remarkable from a tactical standpoint, but it was also incredibly dangerous from a risk management perspective. Martinez leaned forward, her expression serious. You came very close to becoming a casualty statistic instead of a success story. Ma'am, I understand the risks I accepted. I also understand the risks that 12